Welcome to ECTV Live. I'm Rusty Fenner. Thank you for joining us. David DeCosmo is off this week. We hope he'll be back next week. He's on some family business with his wife Leona this week. So David, good to have you aboard. Joining us is a regular guest actually on my radio show, the Shale Gas News on GEM 104 and 94.3 FM, The Talker in this area on Saturdays. My good friend Brian Oram. Brian is a professional geologist, a PG, a hydrologist, and he is one of the founding members of the Keystone Clearwater team. And water is really in the news. Brian, thanks for joining us here on the show.
Happy to be here, and thanks for asking me to come.
Water, we all live downstream.
Yes.
Remember that, correct?
Yes. Yeah, that was one of the first presentations I did, where we talked about why we always have to worry about not just what we do, what goes on upstream and downstream of us, because we all live downstream. We all have to think about how what we do impacts not only ourselves but others.
It's amazing. When I lived in New Jersey off and on for 20 years, when I worked in New York City, it was amazing that you talk about recycling. People complain about water in some of the areas that have reservoirs and spring-fed areas like this area. But you talk about New Jersey, where all the water is used about 4 different times when you get it. It was amazing that one of the main outfalls of the sewage plants of Passaic County was about 2 miles upstream from where the intake for the Anheuser-Busch Budweiser brewing plant was in Newark, and that was the water that was being taken in and ingested to make their beers. And again, I'm a non-beer drinker, but I've always heard people say you can always tell a beer that's brewed in New Jersey, and that's probably a lot has to do with that, Brian.
Well, and around here, the great example of that is, if you had a choice between living in Wilkes-Barre and Danville, the upside of living in Wilkes-Barre is Danville drinking your treated wastewater. So hey, another reason to be a little further upstream.
I found that out years ago. Aqua Pennsylvania pumps everything out for Danville, which upstream is not only a lot of acid mine drainage from the Old Forge borehole, but of course all your treated waste plants.
Yeah, and untreated waste
plants. And untreated waste plants, which is the problem. Tell us about the Keystone Clearwater team, Brian.
Yeah, it's the Keystone Clean Water team. And the organization started first as part of what was called the Carbon County Groundwater Guardian Program. It was 2 teachers, like your mom, up in Carbon County School. One guy was a retired chemist. Realized that they moved into the area and realized that the people weren't even bothering to test their well water. And at that time, I lived in Carbon County, lived in Albrightsville, was working at Wilkes University. And they said, hey, we want to put together an education program to get people to test their water. I already had started in 1989 when I was at Wilkes, a national program called the Homeowner Outreach Program, where we were reaching out to people nationwide and providing them a resource to get their water tested for a reasonable fee and getting that information back out as part of education. So this is the problems we found. We would post it as new people come in from different states. We'd post what we found. That created the website I have, water-research.net, water-research.net. And so then we linked in with Carbon County Groundwater Guardians. We did training sessions on your well water. I'm a soil scientist and a Pennsylvania Sewage Enforcement Officer. So we did education programs on maintaining your septic systems. As new things came about, we went in and did talks about recycling programs, recycling waste, how rural people can do that effectively. Talked about pharmaceuticals, rather than just pouring your drugs down the drain, how to get rid of them properly. And just worked through a series of programs and information like that. We still work with Carbon County. They're actually one of the board members. And one of the most recent programs we did was talk about stormwater. We did rainwater programs on building rain barrels, talking about how you can get to zero, what it really takes to have no stormwater come off your property. They do that in other areas. We're not ready for that.
You've had that for a long time, personally.
In about 2009, we started, I also work as a consultant. So in 2009, we saw some of the things that were coming down the pike where we probably would have in the near term stormwater authorities. And I was in the process of thinking about adding on to my older home. It was built in the 50s. So when we did the addition for the older home, all the stormwater runs through before it can potentially discharges. Gravel swales, pond, on the property, subsurface detention structures, and reuse.
Which you've seen a lot in the past 20 years with holding lagoons from malls and
Right.
parking runoff,
Right.
so it dissipates and evaporates rather than gets discharged into a storm drain.
Right, and putting in rain gardens and the benefits of those. So on my home, we did some of that where it was economical, that we could do that without modifying the foundation, because again, it's an older block home. But educating the public on that, what they can do to have less of an impact on those things. And we continue that program now. The last founder wanted to leave and shut down the program in 2011. That's when I was thinking about retiring from Wilkes and just leave Wilkes and just do my consulting practice. And at that point, they said, well, yeah, let's do that and change the vision of the organization. And that's where the organization went from Carbon County focus and took on more of a statewide focus. And that's why we renamed the organization the Keystone Clean Water Team. We still do the same things. You can't go there for free water testing, but everything that's on the website is my content that we donated to the organization. Information is free about how to test for, and then what we have done is go out and found some of the most cost-effective testing protocols that people can do on their own. So if somebody wants to check their water at home for like $30, they could have a kit mailed to their house. They can test it themselves. If something shows up a red flag, they can call and talk to me, and I give them a recommendation and advice, no charge. If they want to have a certified lab test, we'll put them in touch with a certified lab that does that testing. If they want something a little more of an informational water test, because they're thinking about treating their water because it's a private well, we have agreements with the National Testing Lab where a portion of the water testing comes back to the organization as a donation. So they're really founding and supporting the mission.
And the website again, Brian?
The easiest website, remember, is pacleanwater.org.
And we'll give that again before the end of the program as well. We have come a long way since the late 1960s. I remember as a kid growing up in Duryea along the Lackawanna River. The Lackawanna was possibly the most polluted waterway, probably on the East Coast. Raw sewage. They came out with the the phony information that we couldn't put sewer lines down in this area because you would hit the mine shafts, which are filled with water and all that, and direct discharge of fecal matter and everything in the river. And in 1970, 71, the first South Scranton sewer water, the stormwater authority came in, the sewer authority, and built the first sewage treatment plant. And we've come a long way, and still a long way to go, Brian.
Oh yeah, no, I remember I grew up down in the Hanover section of Wilkes-Barre, and so the Wilkes-Barre Sanitation Authority on Fridays used to burn their sludge, and that was a wonderful odor. You'd walk out.
They used to do it on Coxton Road in Duryea. They used to burn the ash as well. Absolutely.
You go down there, and this nice burning sense would be in your nose. But yeah, and things that I didn't know. After just prior to the '72 flood, my family moved from Hanover section of Wilkes-Barre right into Wilkes-Barre, and they bought their first house in the floodplain. They were renting before, so I remember I loved it for one simple reason. When the streets would flood, I'd be out there in my inner tube. So I was having a ball as a kid playing in sewage, basically, and I didn't know.
We've all done that as kids, and
I didn't know
we
it.
weren't for the wiser at the time.
I didn't know it. I never swam the Susquehanna River. We did carp fish in the Susquehanna River, and at that point down in Wilkes-Barre, there was a Jewish, Jewish deli or a cafeteria, and so we would actually sell the carp to them.
Sure, that's a delicacy absolutely.
And that's how I earned some money when I was young. But yeah, we've come a long way with respect to that. But the problem with our urban areas are bad choices in the past. I mean, some bad choices recently, but bad choices in the past. I mean, the biggest bad choice was combined sewers. And that's our headache.
It is the headache.
I think for Wilkes-Barre area, the estimated cost in 2005, I think it was, to just take the combined sewer overflows
and to separate,
filter, just to take out the solids, was $40 million. And a lot of that would have been manual. There was only a couple bag. And there was, I think it was Konjarsky at that time was proposing a inflatable dam.
I remember that.
And my sole reason for supporting the inflatable dam was the fact that to get the inflatable dam built, they'd have to do that first. And I was like, well, wait a second. You mean...
You're going to have a reservoir of sewage behind this
Right.
inflatable
I said,
dam.
so you're going to put the inflatable dam in, but one of your conditions is to filter all the combined sewer overflows and get rid of the solids. Right. And I go, well, yeah, okay, I'm for the inflatable dam as long as we can monitor the water quality there. And if the water quality goes bad, I can de-inflate it. Because now, in my mind, I've now invested that $40 million and dealt with the CSOs. And that's why, I mean, publicly, that's what I said. I support this project for this simple reason. It's going to get us to fix this other problem. And we can, and at that point, Wilkes was doing some real-time monitoring on the Susquehanna River, and we were able to actually figure out, based on things we can measure, when fecal coliform would have been high. So he said, hey, we can put a monitor here, and we think we have a good correlation when the following numbers get this high, your fecal coliform levels are too high.
And you can narrow that down, like morning and afternoon drive, more or less. Those are the peak times.
Exactly, and then we could play with that. And I said, if that fixes the CSO problem, which is the stormwater problem we have now, and the fees, is in part caused by that, that's fixed, rather than ripping all the pipes out of the street. Because the problem with the combined sewer overflows is that the sewer lines are owned by the cities and towns, and the CSO discharges are owned by the authority. And the towns aren't willing to take on that requirement, because the authority has the permit, not the towns.
Sure. And there's the rub in the latest fee. I would be remiss if we did not address the third bill that I get at my home for sewage. You know, I tell folks I used to work with out of town, and they said, what do you mean you get 3 sewer bills? I said, well, believe it or not, I get 3 sewer bills. One to the town, now the Chesapeake Bay Authority, and then, of course, to the whatever, the Lower Lackawanna or the Wyoming Valley Sanitary Authority. And they say, people who I worked with in New York in that area say, our sewage bill is based, it comes with the water bill. It's based on water in, water out. And I'm thinking, what's next? Now, we already have a water bill. Now they're kicking around the fact to charge you on a meter for water used outside for your lawns and for inside. Like, what next? How do you feel about this other bill for Chesapeake Bay? I mean, why don't they tax, why don't you tax the headwater people as well as the people that always bear the brunt of these things in this area, Brian?
Yeah, I think some of the fundamental root problem with what's going on is there's a lack of knowledge of cause and effect. So in our area, some the big problems with let's say stream water quality for the urban area that we live in is the combined sewer overflows. That's a huge one. The next one would be the urbanization that occurred probably prior to 1970 that really didn't have volume control. But after that, in the 80s and to current, we have infrastructure that was put in to meet volume control, to meet mandatory recharge, and to really do water quality. The problem with this is that this came not from a law so much as a court case. And we have, my big problem is that we have too many laws, or let's say guidance documents, or things that we get stuck with that don't go through the regular process of being a bill and a law. They get settled in court. And as we talked earlier,
that's the first place you don't want it.
You don't want
is in court.
You don't want facts settled in court because court's not about the truth.
That's right.
It's about what we can agree to, and that's the first problem. So there was a court case that got settled between, I believe, it was the EPA and Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and that part of that settlement put burdens on Pennsylvania. It also put burdens on New York, and so what we're seeing is a response from just a small section of the municipalities that are part of that burden. So one of the requirements is, as part of that burden, municipalities are going to be required, I think, MS4 permits they were going to have to put together, and then do all this management. And one of the things that's stated in some of the news articles is this fee is going to save us, I think, $57 million. The only problem is this $57 million has never been spent. This is $57 million of paperwork.
Right.
That was put on us by a court decree.
That's right.
And this has to stop. Now, how do I feel about the way this fee is going? Like as I mentioned, in about 2009, we saw that we were going to end up having stormwater authorities like we have sewer authorities. And so what we did, me as, let's say, an educator and professional, we educated professionals on stormwater management, how to do it the right way. We proposed legislation that said things like, well, some of the requirements for stormwater that new developments have to do can't really be met. I mean, can't truly be met. They can be met on paper, but they're not really. And so what I proposed then was saying, well, how about if we start creating a bank? So if a developer can say, hey, this is the land development project, and I can meet 80% of this with the best available technology, but this 20% I can't, this 20% would cost me this, we'll put that in the bank.
What's it basically based on? Effluent?
Yeah, well, it would be volume or nutrient.
Nutrient, yeah, sure, of course.
So basically
phosphates,
right.
phosphate flow.
And the same thing, we put that in a bank. And then, what came on tied to this was, riparian buffer zones on streams. So during the discussion about that regulation, I said, well, again, in some of these places, you're saying that the riparian buffer zone needs to be 150 feet on both sides of the stream. Well, the stream is only this wide. The natural riparian buffer zone is only this big. Why does it need to be 150 feet? I said, why don't we do the same thing with that? Put that money into a bank and make it available to farmers. And at the same time, educate the community on what they can do. And one of the problems here is that this is being collected and is being done in a manner that is trying to take off the burden from each township to meet this litigation requirement, ideally saving money that we never spent on paperwork, and saying, let's pull the money. Now, the problem I probably have with it is my bill, first I misunderstood it. I thought it was going to be 60 times 4.
That's what I thought it was going to be, too. I ran down and paid it already, and then they say, well, don't pay it. Well, I ran to the post office, got a money order, and paid this, and they said the first time ever in the history of bills paying, they said, don't pay this bill.
Right,
so I saved my receipt in my pocket.
Yeah, so my bill, I actually have theoretically paid my stormwater fee for the next 4 years, accidentally. Because that's what I'm used to as a quarterly bill. And
Sure,
I paid it.
right, exactly.
I pay it all at once. So I'm a little ahead of the game. But what I don't like is some of the things what we're going to spend the money on. We're spending the money at the end of the pipe.
Really?
Well, we should be spending the money on the 1960 developments that have nothing.
That's right.
The water in the headwater. It's easier to control the water before it goes into the stream than once it's there.
The biggest kudo is going to be to clean out the catch basins?
Yeah.
That is so Neanderthal in thinking.
It's the same thing. Is rather than saying we got to go back, we're going to have a program, we're going to do that to maintain these catch basins, which, by the way, they should have been maintained by the developer that put them in. That's their job and their responsibility. But why are we not investing the money on the back end? Why are we going back to the towns, the cities that were built in the 60s and say, here's your problem. Here's the way you can knock this down. You can be part of the solution. Rather than just paying a bill. Hey, pay this, we'll fix it. Because all the fixes are talking about sweet streeping. And the last thing is there's no discussion about, do we need all this pavement?
I know.
I mean, part of the problem with stormwater is the regulations. It comes from a European model that came out of Philadelphia, Allentown, where we don't need all this pavement. We don't. Get rid of it. And sometimes it doesn't work. The analogy doesn't work really well, but I'll try it. 1 acre of pavement on an annual basis generates the same amount of acreage as about 30 acres of forest.
That's amazing.
So a lot of times what you'll hear is saying, we got to preserve land because that'll help us manage stormwater and things like that. And I'm like, well, why don't we get rid of some of the pavement? If I can get rid of an acre of useless pavement that's damaged, not being used, or convert it into a porous pavers or to something else.
Something will soak up the rather than runoff.
Maybe I'm doing a better job. And it's in the headwaters. It's not at the end of the pipe. So I think that's, where hopefully the discussion will go.
Well,
but again, I don't like, my biggest problem with it, again, it's another thing where the government is using court cases to create laws that are supposed to, or guidance that are supposed to govern us, when we're supposed to govern ourselves.
Well, your appearance is at a very timely time, to come on and discuss that. I want to get to another couple topics on the show about a big misconception, which I go through all the time, is that folks, when they buy the bottled water,
Sure.
from the big two companies, of course, Pepsi-Cola with
Okay.
Aquafina and Coca-Cola with Dasani, they really use the term spring water, and I roll my eyes thinking, I'm not even going to go into this discussion, but that is nothing but
It's purified water.
That's right,
Yeah,
tap
so,
water.
Yeah, and so
municipal water supply, Allentown, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, sometimes.
And
yeah.
it's amazing, if they did not balance that with all the minerals and chemicals they put in, you
sucks.
wouldn't be able to drink
You
it,
don't want to
probably.
drink it. You don't want to drink it. No, you don't want to drink it. It tastes terrible. But for bottled water, I do have bottled water clients. Most of my bottled water clients are spring water sources. So I don't want to get them mad.
Yes,
Anyway,
exactly.
I think I do about 200,000 gallons a day in a bottle.
How about that?
Right now for my clients. So I just want to put that out there. So we just posted an article, or a link to an article on bottled water. One of the things that we'll tell you, if you want to use bottled water, I think bottled water is great for going camping, have emergency supply, etc. But first thing is you want to read the bottle. So
Absolutely.
If you read the bottle and it says purified water, you can make that at home cheaper. So if you're on a public water supply system, so city water, you can make that same water in the bottle for about 2 cents a gallon by putting a little point of use filter in your house. And I suggest you do that. Buy yourself a couple stainless steel bottles, reuse them. You'll save a lot on plastics. You won't be carrying this big stuff around. The other thing, the article, this came out on plasticizers. There were certain brands, I'm not going to say which ones,
Sure.
but it's on the website.
Absorption rate.
No, actually found plastics in the water, microplastics. And again, my guess would be it
Water
would be,
absorb the plastics.
Yeah, you would actually. So my guess is that those water would be waters that are city waters, or from streams.
Sure.
Surface waters that would be the highest, and not spring waters.
Chlorinated use of chloramines.
Right. So you'll see a lot of bottle. What they'll do is if it is a drinking water source, they'll take all the chlorine out and they'll polish it. They'll filter it. They might go through a reverse osmosis process. They'll hit it with ozone, so they have ozone in it as a disinfection byproduct. But you always want to read the bottle. There's some great local brands that are spring water. So if you do like spring water and you want that, look at the bottle and look for it saying spring water. Locally preferred.
Well water in your house.
Yeah.
Does it have to be normally treated?
Well, it depends. So.
And you've been on about the gas industry, about
Sure.
our show, the Shale Gas News, and the high concentration of methane in the Dimmick area and all
Sure.
that. Naturally occurring, of course. But
yeah, in part.
How would you treat well water? Because so much of this area in the viewing area have wells.
Sure. And so one of the things is we have a great book that we donated to the Keystone Clean Water team that talks about Pennsylvania water quality. In general, about 50% of private wells are impacted by bacteria. Not because the aquifer is impacted, but it's because how we built the wells. So if you're a private well owner that has never tested your water and do not have water treatment system, there's about a 50% chance that you're drinking water that will make you sick. So I can easily say that.
That's a high statistic.
That's not.
I know, that's amazing.
And now of that, there's about, I think, 10 to 20% of those that have E. coli in their water.
That'll kill you.
That'll make you sicker.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
And so then beyond that, we have one of the problems with our water is that in most cases it's too pure. And so because it's too pure, it tends to be corrosive. So there's parts of Carbon County outside the coal regions that the water comes out of the ground, parts of our area here in Scranton and Wilkes-Barre, where if you're on a groundwater source, the water comes out of the ground, and it actually has not enough stuff in it. And if you run it through copper pipes and metal pipes, it'll leach the metals out, so it'll be corrosive. And that's, I think, about 30% of well water sources have that problem. So there's layers of problems. So what we recommend is that you get the water tested. If you never had your drinking water tested, get it tested. There's some decent kits you can screen at your own at home. There's some better tests that cost a little more. You can still screen at home. There's certified lab testing, and there's informational water testing. And one of the things in the book, we go over that. We go over the parameters. We have a phone app that talks about drinking water quality. How it's the one phone app talks about the water quality parameters, your health. So if you have specific health problems, you can go there and say, I have this, like an autoimmune disorder, and you can say, I have this autoimmune disorder. It'll list the water quality parameters that might adversely influence you. And then finally, in the one phone app, it'll have the problems at the home. So, hey, I'm at corrosion of my piping, what the cause might be, and how that might be you could test for a water quality parameter. For baseline water testing on natural gas, we have another phone app that basically provides you recommendations on what to test for. We provide, there's a couple different layers of recommendations. We provide the recommendations from our organization, the various tiers, like a tier 1 basic screening test or more advanced, depending on where you're at. We provide the recommendation from the Marcellus Shale Coalition, and we provide what DEP recommends. And right now we're adding to the app the parameters for if you're near a pipeline or near a quarry. Because, again, we forget those secondary issues. There's no, for natural gas development, there's no presumption of impact for pipelines. There's no presumption of impact from a quarry. With respect to natural gas development, probably the best thing I can say, when I worked at Wilkes, we worked at Wilkes and looking at the data, we found that, as I mentioned, almost 60% of private wells had a problem that had nothing to do with natural gas. And we found, I think it was about 10 to 15% of the wells had a problem that if you looked at the data would have been caused by natural gas, and natural gas development never occurred. So these were wells that were too deep.
I think you and I can agree that natural gas is a scapegoat in many areas for this.
Yeah, and well, that's one of the reasons. The one program we started is there was a database management company that had a product called Neighborhood Hazard Search. And so when we went out and talked to communities about well water, natural gas, and other things, people would forget about the hazards that are in the community already, like the old landfills. So the 501c3 bought the license, and we can generate neighborhood hazard reports for anybody in the U.S. for, I think it's like $50. And it's a database search around the address you provide. We'll tell you if there's any specific hazards within 300 feet, and actually any specific hazards within a mile. It's kind of cool because the database in some areas includes drug, I always say this wrong, drug labs. And we did a report for a woman in Colorado. She was moving into a housing complex. We ran the report. She was worried about natural gas drilling and in the area. And I said, well, I wouldn't worry about that. There's no reports, but the hotel, the apartment complex you're moving into had 4 drug labs in the last 4 years. It was fascinating.
Brian, the website one more time?
PACleanwater.org.
And I thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Brian Orm, professional geologist, hydrologist with the Keystone Clean Water team. And we'll see you back here next week. Mark McGlory, of course, thank you so much for the technical guru of the Lackawanna County system here. For David DeCosmo, Rusty Fender, back again next week here on ECTV Live.